last couple questions here that I have for you. Where do you think the future of genetic related services are going, and what do you see that most people don't?
Yeah, it's a great question. I like to start out with a professor. His name is Dr. Larry Smarr, and he has a video on YouTube called "The Future Disease." He's a professor at UC San Diego that was able to predict his Crohn's disease, 8 to 10 years before it happened. And the way his story kind of evolved was, he went to his doctor, got a whole bunch of labs done as a normal checkup. One of his labs, called CRP, which looks at inflammation through the blood, was 5 times over the healthy average. And he went to his doctor and said, "Hey, why is this 5 times over?" And the doctor tells him, "You're probably just unique. I don't know." And as a scientist, he was like, "That doesn't make any sense. I'm going to dig in." So he started digging in, 500 plus ish tests, multiple labs over, the course of multiple years. Then he started incorporating genetic testing, human genetic testing, as well as microbial testing. And back then, the technology wasn't quite there yet. So in order to sequence the microbiome, he actually had to use UC San Diego's supercomputer to get the data, but he had access to it because he was a professor. And so he started looking at all his labs, created a dashboard, and the things that were out of range would light up as red. And he would look into the research and say, okay, my CRP is over, I have snippets in my DNA that are more prominent. My microbiome has an overgrowth of E. coli. Now let me put this picture together. Let me look at the research. And he was like, oh my goodness, based on the research, I might have Crohn's. Right? So he asked his doctor, can you do an endoscopy? Can you do a colonoscopy? Because that's kind of the gold standard. You put a microscope in your stomach to see if there's little inflammation, little patches of bleeding, in order to verify if you have Crohn's. So the doctor did it, nothing, super clean. And there was no problem there. And the doctor's like, well, you probably most definitely don't have Crohn's. I don't see anything. But what was actually happening was on a microscopic level where you couldn't see it. And there was microinflammation that you couldn't see on the scope. And so a couple years later, does another colonoscopy, does another endoscopy, boom, starts seeing inflammation in the gut. And so why did I tell this whole long-winded story? Well, the idea is that using omics, using any sort of genetic testing from human, microbial, and environmental, we can essentially scale down the amount of effort, time, and resources that Larry Smarr did to find out he had Crohn's, down to 500 plus tests over multiple years, down to 3 tests that can say, hey, based on this analysis of your DNA, your microbial, and your environmental, you're more susceptible to have these kind of problems. Now do these gold standard tests, look at your vitamin levels, look at your inflammation levels, and so forth, and double verify, right? So we're starting at the root and working our way, right? Versus what Larry Smarr had to do, he had to, okay, I have a problem, let me reverse engineer all the way back to the root cause. And that took so much time, so much money. For him as a professor, he had access to those tools. Everyday consumers don't, right? So I really believe that's where the future of healthcare is going to be, where we're able to use machine learning, use these different tests, next generation DNA testing, genetics, to predict where illness is going to go, verify it through additional gold standard testing, and then provide interventions. Let's start with natural means. Can we affect the labs? Can we affect the trajectory and the outcome? If not, then let's move to pharmaceuticals, right? But I really believe this is where healthcare is going to go in the future. And that's where, Thryve is going to be headed.